it's harder to take something dull and punch it up than it is to go really wild and kind of bring it back into the zone,
Oh,
essentially.
I like that. Hello, Writers and Crafters. I'm Valerie Isan.
And I'm Erick Mertz.
And this is episode 189 of the podcast, and it's June 4th, 2025. As we record this today, we're here with David Carson. We're talking about unconventional thinking and tackling creative blocks. So, more on that in a minute. We want to thank our existing patrons for believing in our work offline and here on the podcast. You can become a patron of the arts at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan, IHSAN, for books, writing instruction, coaching, and planning. Also, planner plays and monthly reflections are always free for members on Patreon. I don't list them as public though, so you have to go in and click for the correct tier, the free member for the updated links and dates and cancellations. You can also go to patreon.com/strange air stories for short stories and novellas in the paranormal mystery genre, written by Erick.
Those are
Hello,
yeah, I
everybody.
was going to say, I know the guy that writes those. I
He's
sometimes hang out with
awesome.
him.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes I don't.
Oh man. All right. Well, Eric, it's been a couple weeks, I think, again, since we've
Been a
seen each
bit.
other. What's going on in your world? What are you doing? I know Shadow
Right.
Signals is on
Shadow
sale
Signals
now.
is out. Yeah, that's been, that wave is hit. Uh, anytime I do anything on Amazon, I end up doing a lot of like fixing of previous, volumes. So I've spent a lot of time just kind of going in and polishing the books of every book that I have out there. So doing a lot of back and front matter. I'm publishing an anthology with a friend called Back Into the Ground. It's an anthology of Pacific Northwest horror. I know I've talked about that before. We are in the home stretch of that. I didn't know all of the things that went into publishing an anthology with 13 authors with 13 different opinions about things would be like. So,
And when you update, when you upload that file, you're going to have to in the metadata put all of those author names
oh
so
dear
that it
goodness.
so it populates, because you want to, like, I'm in an
Yeah,
anthology too. Like I want to have that on my author page and
yeah,
on,
yeah.
when you search my name, I want that book to show up. So,
I would be lying if I said I didn't research how to publish an anthology on Amazon just to make sure I didn't miss anything. We have so many authors that are so excited. Like we have one this I say this with with a little heart flutter. One of the authors said, "Well, when you send my contributor copy, can you and James, who's the co-editor, can you autograph it to me?" I was like,
oh,
"This is this all the work that we've done is now worth it." It felt so like
oh,
when she was so happy it was her first story, and it's one of the best. So
oh, good. That's awesome.
yeah, it
Yay.
was very heartwarming. So that's been a lot of time just like doing the business of being an author, a lot of time. So what about you?
Um, I'm still kind of catching up from being in Florida. I went to a book club meeting. I cleaned my son's kitchen.
Wow,
He's like in
whoa.
his early 20s and he's on the spectrum and he never asks for help. He hates it. He doesn't. And we are talking about generational stuff. Like, I don't know if it's a generational thing. Both my kids don't like to ask for help. So when he does, it's like, yay, thank you, and I even thanked him. I'm like, thank you for letting me come and help you. Seems like a backwards thing. You want to
I was gonna say,
coach your
I hope this is not
kids to
my
like,
future.
all right, you're 20 something now. Like you should be able to like take out your recycling and break down boxes. But it just becomes this big, huge thing. And
Yeah.
then, once it gets so big, you can't see it. And every time you look at it, you're like, there's so much anxiety, which he has too, So I was happy that I could, spend a couple hours and make their kitchen more manageable. My dog, my youngest dog, she's 5 now, and we started her on her next round of dog training. So she's in dog 2 now. So that just started last Saturday,
Love it.
mostly just for intellectual stimulation. And I mean, she doesn't have great manners, but she does have pretty good recall and she loves to play. And so she's easy to be around, but she gets bored, so especially with the old dogs, like she can't play with anybody here. They all just bark at her and lunge. So we wanted her to go do something fun. I started emailing personal invites out to like past retreat participants to come check out the new coaching program and um, yeah, more
Cool.
aligned author stuff, like trying to
Right.
um, find those soul-led experts and creators and writers that are ready to like channel their life's work into this new book and they've never written before. And so I'm just trying to find those people. Um, yeah. I'm gonna be working on a freebie. I don't know if I told you this, Eric. I'm working on a freebie for my mailing list and for patrons, a three-part micro masterclass on structure, story structure, character arc,
Cool.
that sort of thing, universal truth, theme statements. Um, so yeah, I guess just sort of picking up the pieces and trying to like settle back into being around here. After the pool at my sister's house for 4 days,
In Florida.
in Florida. Yeah.
I had some Florida family here, and it was my son said like when after they kept saying you need to come to Florida, and my son said like I thought they lived in Florida. He thought they were two different places. I'm like, no, 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 they're the same place. As we are different. We're in a different, nation from Florida.
What about you, David? What's up in your world?
Gosh, there's a lot happening. I guess we had a sort of a pre-conversation that I was really enjoying that I think would be nice to bring into here. I was telling
Sure.
you about my weekend of discovering this guy in the Netherlands who's making this thing called Fake My Run, and that became sort of my weekend sort of rabbit hole or it's something that if you're a runner. As I was explaining, if you're a runner and you are into running, you most likely have this program called Strava that you share your runs on, where it will sort of show where you went, right? Sort of all the data around, what your heart rate was, how far you went, right, so forth. But apparently, running has gotten so performative that people love, sharing on Strava so much that they're actually hiring fake runners to run for them, right? So that they can share those runs. And I thought that was just
Like pinch hitting.
yeah, it's just so funny because like they really like the dopamine hits them, in just the same way of pretending like they ran, right? And then actually running. It's kind of like, when you say, "Oh, I thought about giving to charity," and just by the thought of thinking that I would even do such a thing,
Right,
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 has somehow made me feel better. So this guy in the Netherlands, I think, is just really great because rather than, getting on a comment board and saying how terrible this is or chastising or moralizing, he's like, how could I make that even worse? Like rather than a Strava mule where I'd pay somebody 10 to 20 bucks, he's like, wait a minute, like what if I just created a website where people didn't have to do that at all? What if I could just, make it up all on a website? People could go to my website called Fake My Run and that would generate and share it to Strava for you for 42 cents, right? Essentially. And what was
I
funny was
love
like
it.
all the comments that he got back from people was, I never realized how performative my jogging, right, became, right? I never realized that I was, getting more joy out of, sharing this data than the actual run itself. And so it just got people to kind of question what they were doing and why they were doing it in the first place. And I thought, like, if you're going to be an activist, what a really interesting way, right, to do
Right.
activism, right? Essentially is, hey, what's the thing that's terrible? How do I make a version of it that's even more terrible? Right? And launch it into the world for people to react to. It's kind of an interesting way to do satire, obviously. But that was my weekend.
I love the rabbit hole.
I was thinking about it. I had mentioned before David Foster Wallace, but the book that's straight out of the book Pale King. If you haven't read The Pale King, that is like straight out of that book.
I feel like now after our conversations, I now need to go read everything from David Foster Wallace because I mean, such a great character for me growing up, but like, you were talking before, he is a crystal ball, not necessarily just a writer. Everything that he wrote about in the past has now come right to be, which in the past we thought that's a crazy idea, that's a crazy character, that makes no
Right.
sense. And lo and behold, here we are.
Lo
It
and behold.
does.
What are you reading, David?
Right now, I'm reading a few different things. what I have
Yeah,
on here.
he
So
fits right in, right? He's
Right?
reading a
I
few
Yeah.
thought
different things.
you can never figure out like when somebody says, "What are you reading?" Because if you're like me, right, you're constantly reading a bunch of things all at the same time. So it's never really it's like you've got too many tabs open, you have too many books open, right? That kind of thing. But one of them is there's actually a friend of mine that has started this really great new sort of imprint called 831 Stories. And it's all like romance novel stuff. This I am not the audience for this, but I wanted to read them. So this is one of them. It's called Comedic Timing, and it's by Up Apansa Barath. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry if I'm not, but I'm reading that one. And then I've got this one, which is the nonfiction read, which is The Case Against Reality uh, by Donald Hoffman. That's really good. And then because I'm a glutton for punishment, I'm rereading The Weirdest People in the World, which is a really interesting book. I don't know if you guys have ever read that at all. It's more or less a history book of why the West and why Western culture is, as weird and as dominant as it has become over the last 500 years. It gives a really interesting case for how, right, those people are the weirdest people in their customs, and it's fascinating book.
Cool. I just finished The Sisters of Sweetwater Fury, that historical novel about the 1913 Great Lakes storms. Um, and now I haven't even started it yet, or maybe like one page in or something. It's called How to Read a Book, novel by Monica Wood. So that's
One
what
page
I'm
in. I like that.
one page in. I don't know if it's any good.
You open the cover and then put it down.
Yeah, because I can't remember, like, you try to like fit in reading in the little 15 minutes here in between things, you know?
Yeah.
So
Wait,
that
you
was
can't
like, I
commit an
picked it
hour and a
up
half
and
every day to reading?
what's that?
You can't commit an hour and a half a day to reading. I always idealize these people who like, I sat down and finished a book today. And you're like, who are you? How do you
That's
have
an
that
anomaly.
much time?
I really got to ask for proof, right, for
Yeah.
that. Maybe there's
It's
a
performed. They
Strava.
paid a mule. They paid a book mule to read the
Exactly.
book for them.
Exactly.
Well, let me tell you, full disclosure, it wasn't last night that I read. It was the last night was for taking Ali to the airport to go for a
Mm,
week to visit friends in Ohio, and I binge watched a bunch of episodes of Next in
yeah.
Fashion,
Mm,
Ooh.
which I've seen already. I just wanted to watch it again.
love it.
Yeah, a little bit of ambient television for
Sometimes it's called for.
Yeah.
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 Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it.
I like that ambient television. I like
Right.
that much better.
I see that with my kids a lot where, there's just something constantly on all the time in the same way that when I was a kid, there was a network called MTV, which is funny to say it in
Oh,
this weird past tense as if it was some sort of historical relic. I guess it is now. But that was just something that was just always on, right,
Well,
in the
it's
back.
because the radio, it was music, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Until it wasn't music, right? And then it became something else entirely. Funny story, by the way. I actually created a music network called Fuse that was a competitor to MTV. It was started in we started around 2000, 2001. And there was this feed coming in from Canada. It's called Much Music, which is awesome. Great, great, great channel. And the idea was to essentially turn off this feed and create something entirely new to go up against MTV. But it was right at that point where they were no longer playing music videos because they weren't rating anymore. And
Right.
it was interesting because the team there had just started like reality programming, if you remember The Real World, which was kind of
Yep.
the beginning, right, of that whole genre. And they
Yeah.
realized that that's what was rating, and music videos, right, were not. So when we're starting this channel, literally had two nickels to rub together in order to like a David and Goliath, right, kind of story. And we decided that the one thing MTV could not do is play music videos. Brian Graydon, who was head of programming, was like, "I won't get a bonus if I play music videos. Like we won't rate." So we realized that that's what we need to do. We need to play music videos and really, right, dig into music. But we thought that was, like, how could we make this even dumber? Like, how could we just make noise, right, with that idea? So we had decided that we need to make the music video an endangered species. So we lobbied Congress to make the music video an endangered species. We then created these sort of like billboards around the Viacom building in New York City. And we really just sort of made fun of MTV, said there is no M in MTV, put it on all their coffee cups, just really tried to get at the people that worked at MTV. But it generated all this press because we then got Sally Struthers. If you remember Sally Struthers with
Mhm.
the Save the Children
The
Foundation.
wavery voice, the yeah.
Yeah, so she was kind enough to sort of play with us and be funny, and so in addition to saving the children, she was also going to help us save the music video when we made these really ridiculous plays to that end, and we sort of created that network out of that. But it's weird to think about that as like historically, MTV as the very first sort of ambient television. Right. It's
Yep.
like we would never really apologize, right, for but that they did that and created the reality show genre, I don't know if we look back kindly on MTV or not, right, at this point. But at least it makes you happy for the weekend for watching, what was it, the fashion show?
Next in fashion, yeah.
Next in Fashion.
What about you, Eric? What are you reading?
I'm reading a book called A Wounded Deer Leaps Highest
Oh,
by Charlie Stevens. Um, really local press, really tender and heartfelt and yeah, interesting book.
who's the author? Charlie.
Charlie Stevens. It's with Torrey House Press. It's like this. I picked it up because it was like it was in this like if you like nature in your fiction, pick up this book and it's
Cool.
good.
All
It's
right.
worth reading. I am not reading a bunch of things at once. I picked up the a swim in the pond in the rain.
Mm-hmm.
It's sitting chair side, but I haven't
You haven't cracked it. I
I
listened to
haven't
that in
cracked it yet.
audio when I read it. It
Interesting.
was a
And did
nice
he
it
did
was a nice thing to like listen to because it was because it's educational. And then
right?
you get, the short stories written or read by actors. So you get a
Does
little
George
bit of
Saunders
fiction
do
and
the
nonfiction at the same time. It's really rad.
Ooh, that's cool.
does George Saunders do the
Yeah.
narrative to it?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, because he's a teacher, so like
Yeah.
I thought it was a great audio production.
Can I
Oh,
mention one more thing that
Yeah.
I'm reading? Because it's not necessarily a book, but it feels like it's either on its way to becoming a book or something. It was on N plus one. I don't know if you're fans. I've always loved N plus one. It's always a fun place to discover, new writers and really weird ideas. And this one is by Sarah Miller called The Pirates of Ayahuasca. And the way I got turned on to it because somebody mentioned and said, "This is the White Lotus that we all deserve."
Oh,
How it
ooh,
was put together. I was like, "Ooh, that's a nice. Like, I'm gonna definitely gonna read that." And but it is definitely it's if read it if you get a chance. It's not very long. It's like what would be like a chapter, right? Essentially, but it
okay.
okay.
feels like it's on its way to becoming an interesting story, interesting book.
Cool. Yeah, I'll check it out.
I just looked at it. That shaman stole my personality is the subtitle to
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
I'm
that's
in.
right.
I'm
Yeah.
in. You got me.
Super interesting. Considering our conversations of going up and down the roller coaster of, oh, that's horribly depressing, to wait, that's not so depressing. This one definitely rides that roller coaster.
All right.
Nice.
I feel
All
like we're
right. Well,
destined.
let's
We're
get into
doomed
the
to
main
that roller coaster.
topic using unconventional thinking to tackle creative blocks. David Carson is an entrepreneur and marketing innovator whose groundbreaking companies and products have impacted millions worldwide. Renowned for his expertise in creative thinking, Carson has collaborated with global giants like American Express, Nike, Coca-Cola, and IKEA, as well as cutting-edge advertising agencies including Mother and Ogilvy. His unconventional approach has not only shaped iconic brands, but also challenged traditional notions of problem solving in business and beyond. Welcome, David. This is going to be an
Thanks.
exciting conversation.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to be here with you guys. I think it's gonna be a fun conversation.
So, you have a very, how do I say this? It's a startling clickbaity sort of way of introducing yourself, your newsletter. When you go to your website, it says helping people use dumb thinking as a superpower. So why don't we start there and have
Yeah.
you expand on that?
I mean, obviously provocative for a reason, obviously to try and get your attention, but the whole point is really there's this world where you can actually get smarter by thinking dumber is sort of like the main idea. And I don't mean by lowering your IQ, right? It has nothing to do with right chaos or lowering your IQ. It's really about there's this part of yourself that is really weird. And if you're a writer, you kind of tap into that, right? Quite a bit. But for a lot of people, they really don't. So imagine that, you're a kid growing up and your parents want you to be smart. Your teacher, right, wants you to be smart. Everybody really in your world is rewarding you for being smart. So when you walk into a class or you walk into work or you walk into, right, any type of situation that requires you to have a brain, you're sort of, thinking in this one way around how do I seem like I'm smart? How do I offer something that feels smart? And yet there are a few things that happen to yourself when you have a really dumb question, but you don't ask it, right? Because you feel like, oh, I'll look like I'm stupid, right? If that happens. Or you might actually have a really interesting, intriguing idea, but when you say it to yourself, you're like, that sounds really incredibly dumb, right? So you'll sort of hold it in or you'll keep it to yourself. But the reality is, all throughout history, anything that has actually changed the world or things that have actually become, breakthroughs, whether it's in science or whether it's in culture, tend to come from really dumb ideas or, what would be a dumb idea at the time, right? Dumb's kind of temporal, but it's really sort of it was a way for me to communicate essentially how I've sort of built my career over at least the last 20 years. And I was inspired by my daughter essentially to sort of write this stuff down because my I was back in like 2000 I had a company where I had started it on a really dumb idea. I was trying to get a job working for VH1 for a production company that was doing Behind the Music. Do you remember that show?
Hmm.
Oh yeah.
And Behind the Music, I always loved because it had a great format, right? It started with, the rise of this band or artist, and then you see this really great, like they've made it, but then something happens, right? And it's like, oh, here comes the fall. Really classic storytelling. I love the arc. I thought it was very, very fun. But everything I was doing at the time was, writing spec scripts, trying to meet the producers, right? Emailing them, mailing them, going to parties to network with people, everything that I could think of, right, to get in there. And I was really frustrated. And I was frustrated so much I decided that, screw this. I'm actually, instead of trying to write the best script, right, to show them, I'm going to write the worst script. I just decided that that's what I wanted to do. And I wrote something called Behind the Music That Sucks, essentially. And I decided maybe what I should do is I should just sort of I was always kind of a hacker kid and I could make things. So I made these little cartoons and this essentially became Behind the Music That Sucks. I put it up online. And it took about 6 months and all of a sudden my server bills for my website were just insane. And I thought, oh no, I'm not going to be, what happened? Somebody hacked me or something. But I had a million people watching Behind the Music That Sucks. This is
That's
like pre YouTube. It was insane.
that's awesome.
It was wild. And so it started getting passed around to different artists. So I just it just sort of started what became a career totally by accident, right? And when I look back at that, I think what I was really doing was, I was trying to solve a problem, but I actually, solved it by being dumb, right? Essentially, dumb thinking kind of help solve that problem, right? To break through. And
Hmm.
that's really what Dumbify is about. It's like how can you use that muscle a little more? How could you use that muscle a little, more regularly? How could you, determine, what's a good idea versus a bad idea? Because every dumb idea can be good or it can be bad, the same way that a smart idea can be good, right, or bad. But I just felt like there could be, something that certainly my daughters to learn. It's funny because my daughter's like, look, like, any room I walk into, I'm Gen Z, And B, I'm female, so anything that comes out of my mouth, right? Anybody's like, oh, this is going to be dumb. And
Hmm.
she felt like, at least the stories. I've always collected all these stories, like the history of dumb ideas, essentially. I've just always had these because I thought they were fun. And she's like, when I hear that, it gives me confidence to know that, my dumb idea actually might be valid. Maybe I shouldn't be so scared, right? Essentially.
Oh, that's
So
great.
I love that
Love it.
comment.
Yep.
It's like, oh, I should maybe just at least, start writing this and maybe this will be really helpful. That's where it started.
Yeah. And what a great testimonial, too. You can just use your daughter's testimonial. This
Oh
is why you
yeah.
should buy the book. She can be the
Yeah, yeah,
blurb on
yeah.
the back. So in your book, so you started talking about your book. When does it come out? It comes
Comes
out
out in the
this
summer. Yeah, I think
in
it's
the
coming out in
summer this
August.
year. Okay, yeah, it's called Dumbify. So and then how is there a pre-order link that we can link
Nope,
to?
not yet. I think
Not
that
yet.
should probably come out in July. But you can't go to Demify, which is the newsletter, which you can find at my website, david-carson.com.
Okay.
And every week, I essentially sort of pull apart different ideas and stories. And I think the podcast should start up here in about another 4 weeks as well.
Starting a podcast?
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah,
tell us about that.
it's essentially sort of like it's storytelling. Like I don't know if I'm a really big fan of like Hidden Brain and just
Oh
sort of like
yeah.
podcasts
Great
that
show.
are just being able to tell a story, right? Essentially, there are just so many instances of dumb ideas that have really changed culture and right or have created really great breakthroughs. And the characters that are in them are pretty fun. So I decided it would be maybe a good format, right, to sort of tell those in sort of a narrative way. So those are being produced now. I think that the first 10 are just about in the can, and we'll get those up in the next month or so.
Okay, cool.
It'll
So
be the
in
same name. It'll be Dumbify.
Dumbify, okay. So in Dumbify in the book, you have like exercises to train your brain.
Yeah,
Would
it's
you want
more.
to talk a little bit about those or give us one maybe that we
Sure,
can?
sure. Yeah. It's more like mental models more than anything. It's like, what are ways to think about certain problems and how could you apply it? So one is example, when I was talking about behind the music that sucks, that's essentially kind of like an opposite model. There's sort of two different ways to do that. One is there's the George Costanza model. At least this is what I tell myself. So like there's an episode on Seinfeld where if you remember, George decides or is told like, "Hey, your instincts seem to be all wrong. What if, you spent the day doing the exact opposite, right, of what your instincts tell you to do?"
My
And
husband tells me to do that whenever I take it when I'm driving because I'm
oh,
geographically
rude,
challenged.
rude.
Anytime you want to turn left, go right.
I
Mm-mm.
love it. But if you remember that episode, George ends up having like the best day ever, right, for him. And I think that's an interesting one because you know doing the opposite of what you would typically do, right, forces you to make decisions that you wouldn't necessarily make. And so suddenly you find yourself in new territory, and that can often like right bring up really interesting, fresh ideas, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
another version of that is sort of the make it worse method, which is sort of sort of a derivation of that, which with behind the music, right? I decided how can I make the worst script? I'll make behind the music that sucks, right? But one of the stories that I love, this is one of the collections, is the invention of the potato chip, which I didn't realize that the potato chip was made really out of frustration and a make it worse kind of method. Do you know the story at all? I found it kind of
I
funny.
don't.
It's
I
I
might
guess
have at some point, but I have forgotten it. So yeah, please tell me.
it feels like one of those things that that like you would have learned this in like fourth grade or something, right? When
Right? Yeah.
potato chip. But it actually potato chip's been around for like 150 odd years. And there was this chef, I guess, in upstate New York, and he had this client that came in and or customer, and every time they served them French fries, this customer hated them, and I guess was very vocal about it. So they were either too soft, or they were too hard, or they were too salty, or not salty enough, whatever it was. But each time the chef tried to please this customer, oh, here, try this version of my French fry, right? And eventually just got so frustrated that they decided to make the worst potato chip or the worst French fry. So they cut it thin, they oversalted it, they right? They burnt it and everybody loved them, right? It became a huge hit. And, so the French fry wasn't really an intentional, thing. It was very unintentional, right? And so that mental model, for me at least, is, how could I make something worse? Is kind of an interesting technique to either create new things, or when you do something worse, sometimes you actually find out like what not to do, essentially. So it sort of helps to reframe the problem that you're trying to solve, right? But
It's like it's we were talking about like kind of instant success people, like writing and, expecting instant success. But isn't that what your first five manuscripts are? You've done it poorly, you've learned how to do it, you've done it poorly, you've done it poorly, and you kind of improve from making a series of mistakes. Is that what you're like to put it in a writer's perspective?
Kind of. I think like there's one way to think about that, which would be there's sort of like this marginalization, like you're trying to optimize around the edges to try and filter and get something to be better. But then there's that point, I'm sure we've all felt this as writers, where you get to the point and either you feel stuck, you're not quite sure where this should go. Like there are those places where, where you thought this should go feels like it's not working. And so no matter how many times you try and rewrite, right, that it's not working. So sometimes you kind of need to take yourself out of that situation and try some drastic things in order to just kind of like, shake up your brain a little bit that can really be helpful. But I've found that whenever I jump into projects in general, I tend to start with sort of these mental models first, mostly because that's just how I think. But I think the idea is sort of like if if you can at least hold in your brain that this thing that you've written is not so precious, because as a writer, right, you kind of get to that point where you've gone this far, right? How could you possibly not, right, turn back and really kind of mess everything up again? Like you get really really scared of doing that. And I find that, if you can give yourself the discipline or the time to at least think about those dumb ideas, at the very least, they really help you to sort of, break out of the rut that you might be in. But how many times have you just been invested in something and you're just going to keep going and you keep knocking your head up against the wall?
Right,
And
right.
that's the moment where you should just kind of like wait, take a beat, right? And maybe try these dumb mental models just to see if you can get yourself out of it.
That's awesome. Tell us another story from the book
Well, there's
or
one
from the
thing
podcast, whichever. Yeah.
I
What's
think
your
there's.
favorite one that you've come across?
Well, one of the weirdest ones that I like is that's also very telling. It's that, your dumb idea that you might have in your head right now might be so dumb that people feel like, you should be incarcerated or you should be put in an insane asylum. And that sounds really, we're like, oh, that's how
He's
horrible.
reading my mind.
Right? But it's so funny to think about how dumb is essentially it's very temporal, right? What we used to consider dumb is now considered kind of just everyday now. So as an example, the guy who decided that, hey, as a doctor, if I'm going to go from a chest cavity to delivering a newborn, in between there, then I should wash my hands, right? And that was seen as a terrible, dumb idea. He was put in an insane asylum. He thought that there were these little microbial things, right, that might be on our skin that we now know is bacteria. And like it's fascinating to me that there are people that just sort of naturally, come up with dumb ideas, but there's this force, right? Whether it's culture, whatever it is, your parents or teachers, whatever, there's always something that it's going to rub up against, right? And so at that point, it's like, well, how do you kind of push through that, right? Do you sort of crumble and turn around, or do you kind of push through it? I've always been really almost like super jealous of those people who just have zero self-awareness. And
Oh, you're
right, we've
so
all met
mean.
those people, right?
Oh, I love him.
I worked with this guy and he was amazing. We would go into a meeting and we'd be pitching a new idea, a new campaign or something. And it would just be the worst. I mean, you could see everybody in the meetings like how fast can we get this guy out of the room, right? Essentially. But he would leave that office like as soon as we closed the door, he was just like, "Yes, nailed it." And like How on earth did you get that? Like what? It's like I'm always so jealous of those people.
What signal did you read that from? Yeah.
Yeah, really, really fascinating. But that's sometimes kind of like those people tend to push forward in ways that are uncanny, I think, to most. So for those of us that are maybe too self-aware, what are ways, right, that you can sort of push through that? And for me, like I always try and take a dumb idea and I try and test it really quickly. I kind of want to get feedback quickly. So if you're building anything, like if you're building technology, or you're building an app, or you're building a story, or you're building a show, what's the fastest way to stand it up, right? So that you can actually get it in front of other people and actually get right reactions from it. So it might seem really dumb, but if you can test it quickly, that usually helps. And if it fails, it's obviously good information, so you can go back and either throw it away or refine it, right? Which I think is nice.
Yeah.
So I wonder the fastest way to test a story idea other than like your critique group or something is maybe like an open mic or something or the
Yeah.
moth,
Or having a
something
writing
like
group,
that.
this is why you have a writing group to bring crazy ideas to and see
Yeah.
what they.
O- Others could be like TikTok strikes me as a really interesting tool right now because you can put out any type of idea very quickly, right? And see if it resonates. And what's so fascinating about those algorithms is it's trying to find an audience for you. It's not like YouTube where it's like, hey, good luck with an audience finding your show, right? TikTok is like, oh, wait, let me go and try and find the people that will like this content that I think you've just given me, right? I mean,
Right.
love or hate TikTok, it's an interesting engine for something like that. So if you have an interesting idea or a log line, right, for something, like the ayahuasca pirates that we were talking about before, and that notion of, oh, this is the white lotus that we actually deserved. It's like, ooh, that's kind of interesting. So like just on an idea level, right, you can start to test out, right, those things. And I feel like that's an interesting one. Another sometimes is, just being able to utilize tools that are out there, whether it be, the Facebooks of the world, just being able to put something out to see if people actually respond.
Hmm.
So, one way to do it would be, if I'm writing a book, what's the title of my book and what's the cover look like? What is it? And then can I actually throw up ads for people for a limited time to see if they actually, right, if there's something there, right, potentially.
Like an A/B testing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Just sort of ways to test out ideas. Other ways to go is obviously to find, Reddit groups, which can be another form of hell. So that's a tougher one. Yeah,
I've never had the guts to try to
I have
lead
never had the
into
guts
Reddit.
either.
Yeah.
yeah. Reddit always seems
Feels
very intimidating, right? In like all the wrong ways. You're like, I know the people on here are just like anonymous assassins, but there are some pretty positive communities in there as well. They're just maybe harder to find because outrage sells, obviously.
So
pretty well.
when you were talking about George Costanza model before, I don't know if that's what you call it in the book, but
I do. I call it the George Costanza method. Yeah.
method. Okay, yeah.
Just to
Um,
pause, like that episode, like we have like comfort Seinfeld episodes. That is one of my like top three or four
I'm
because
gonna have to find it on YouTube now
it
or
is
something.
it's on Netflix. It's 21 minutes of brilliance. It's
Yeah.
Now I forgot my question, Eric.
sorry.
I think it had to do with curiosity. Like you were talking about ways to kind of like break up, like that stuck place that we get in, and how to maybe, do you have ideas about how to kind of navigate? I mean, it's one thing to be like, all right, if I'm writing this and I think the character should do this, and so now I'm going to have them do the opposite just to see what happens and shake things up. But and and that's a great way to like start the process. But then how do you like follow that curiosity, I guess, and develop that into something that started out as a dumb idea and makes you excited to follow it and see where it leads?
Yeah. I mean, to me, like creation is usually a mode of asking yourself, is something dumb enough, right? And sort of like asking those what if questions. So, that moment
Nice.
when you have a character, right, and you realize, oh, cool, I kind of like this world that I've sort of created in this character. But then you put them in these what if, right, scenarios as you're sort of thinking through where the story, right, could potentially go. And I find like for the most part, some people can just be incredibly dull. And like it's like how if there's a story, right, essentially that's really going to hook you, it usually tends to be right a place where the idea seems absurd, right? Like where the character might go or the situation that they're in, right, is heightened, right, in that way. So really trying to put yourself in that mode starts from curiosity by asking what if this, right? But then making the what if really crazy. Because if when you do that, right, you're essentially looking at a scenario that might not make any sense, but now you've kind of gotten to a place that you can kind of like get yourself out of and try and figure out, right, a way for it to work. Rather than when you're starting off, it feels like you've kind of gone in a duller, right, direction. It's harder to take something dull and punch it up than it is to go really wild and kind of bring it back into the zone,
Oh,
essentially.
I like that mindset. That's cool. It sounds like this kind of thinking too would really pop if you're collaborating.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. It's really great when you're collaborating. And it's funny because we all have those stories of like the improv comedians. They have that great yes and rule, right? Which
I
is
love that.
fantastic.
Love it.
And like to me, that's like a really good dumb mental model for yourself. So when you are collaborating with people, when you work with somebody and you'll pop out an idea and they're like, no, because of this or because of that, and you're like, hey, like that's not the time for that, right? The when you're collaborating and coming up with stuff, you're really trying to push right yourself and you're trying to push the other person right to go in places that people haven't really gone before. Like that's kind of the whole point, right? It's like you're really trying to show, a story that's really going to be compelling, captivating, and so if you're constantly limiting yourself, right, you're never really going to go beyond the edges, right, essentially, and that just happens to me. That's terribly, unsatisfying. So how do you when you're working
What is
with
unsatisfying?
what's unsatisfying is when you're limiting, right up. Like when you
Right.
when you
From the
Okay.
start and
beginning.
you edit, right, and you just start editing right away, like
Hmm.
so having a collaborator where you're like, hey, I've got this scenario, right? And the yes and right essentially is yes and right. They're adding to it. They're augmenting it. They're never right trying to subtract. And I think that's a great way, right, to work. Then the next mode from that, right, is to try and figure out, right, how that filters. But it's probably pushed you into places that you would not have either considered on your own or had not really considered had you not let your mind, right, kind of go into those places.
So I don't know. I'm kind of afraid to say this out loud, but I'm
Don't be.
wondering.
But the message is don't be afraid to
Yeah,
say it out
exactly. That's
loud.
the
All right,
whole
here's a
point,
dumb
right?
idea. Here's a dumb
Right.
idea. Is
Do
there
it.
a way to use this mental model, especially the one, the yes and, um, collaborating with ChatGPT?
No.
I've actually built some dumb.
I
Shh.
know, like I was afraid to like say it. Like if we're talking about like learning how to be more creative and using our brains, like okay, let's just shunt it off to AI. It's not really what I meant, but I kind of,
Yeah, I
as
know
a
what you mean.
collaborator, how could you use this?
I honestly, I feel like we'd be crazy not to utilize tools that could actually help us, right, in that way. Like as a collaborator, it could either be like any other collaborator. They could be terrible or they could be great. And sort of, I find with those models in particular that it's kind of garbage in, garbage out, right? So,
Yep.
I think it more or less reflects how you are as a collaborator. So if you're actually able to utilize right those tools and ways, I think you'd want to treat it the same way that you would want to, right, to create something successful. But I've actually utilized AI because I was more curious. AI is really trying to be very smart, right? Every prompt that you would give it, you're hoping it's going to give you something that is, very smart and logical. And yet, when thinking about certainly about stories or creating something that's new, sometimes that requires a very illogical, right, kind of response, right, to that. And beyond like the hallucinations that some of these models, right, will have for just having incomplete or false data, it really does try and reason, right, essentially. So
Hmm.
you're like, well, how could I build a tool to sort of unreason, right, if you will? And so those are things that I've built for myself. So I have like little engines, like one of the this the way that I got here was super weird. So I'll just tell the quick little anecdote for it because I
Hmm.
think it's
Yeah.
really weird. So uh, I'm on TikTok where all dumb things start, and this kid has a TikTok and he says, hey, if small is the opposite of large, then what's the opposite of medium, right? Was essentially
Ooh.
his question.
It's a great.
I
There's the
thought
name of
that,
your new podcast, Opposite of
right?
Medium.
Just such a funny question, but I found like there's so many different answers to that, right? Like everybody has a different way, right, of thinking about it. And the way I thought about it first was, well, if small and large are essentially the two extremes, and that thing in the middle, right, is medium, there's somehow a compromise right between the two. So maybe the opposite of medium is uncompromising, potentially, right? So I thought, okay, maybe that's the way to think about it. But then I thought, well, if I actually thought about this differently, like, do you remember in grade school when you learned about like Venn diagrams, right? The
Oh
two
yeah.
circles, they come together. And the way that's taught is, we're going to take these two things that seem like they're unrelated, but when we put them together and we see what they have in common, right? That thing in the middle, right? Essentially. And that's really to try and find commonality, right? More than anything. However, if you think about a Venn diagram, kind of like a Hadron Collider, where you're going to take like atoms and smash them together, they're going to create a new atom, right? Or they're going to create a new element, right? And so I thought, well, what if you could actually take two different ideas? So take something that's extreme, take the small, take the large, smash it together, and what's that thing in the middle that's new, right? That gets created out of it. And that was sort of my attempt to sort of, think about what ChatGPT actually does really well, right? In reason, how would it actually take that dumb idea and like come out with different ideas? And it did it really, really well. So just as like hey, I want to take two opposite things and I want to try and create something new right out of that. So as an example, it came up with cooperation and competition, and it smashed the two things together, and it came up with this word, and it called it coopetition. And I thought that's pretty good. That's pretty interesting. Like, what does that mean? And that like co-opetition could be. Do you remember? I don't know if you guys are like. Well, it sounds like you are because you watch your fashion show. There was this collab between Balenciaga and Crocs, where they sort of created this really crazy high heel Croc, right? Essentially, and it's just
I'm
like
out.
that's an interesting like
I'm
co-opetition.
out.
Like they, come on, Eric.
I'm
Eric,
out.
have we gotten too dumb for you now?
Yeah, that is. Crocs are like the punchline to every bad joke.
But I've
It's
actually seen like some like I think I've seen high heel Crocs or like
Oh, totally.
sneakers that are Crocs, with a big
Balenciaga
wedge
made them.
heel.
Yeah. Yeah, they became this crazy drop, right, for Balenciaga. So I love like there's something fascinating to me about some of the collab culture that is out there because they smash together things that ought not belong together,
right,
right?
right.
And put them together.
Sushi and
And
burritos.
exactly.
Subo is my husband's like favorite fast
I
food
walk right past
place.
that cart every
I
time.
know,
I'm
I'm
like,
like, oh, I don't think
it's
so.
like pineapple on pizza. I don't want to even know what you're
What?
doing over
That's my
there.
Oh,
favorite pizza.
yeah.
Ay, ay, ay.
I'm
But
always
you have
running
to add
into
I have family in
jalapenos.
Florida. Okay, nobody puts pizza. Nobody puts pineapple on pizza in Florida.
I like it. I think if it's weird enough, and if there are things that kind of push you into that weird territory, that's what I like.
Yeah,
I like when I see things that feel like, oh wait, that's really weird. Like how did that happen? It gets me curious. When I see something that is odd or off, like that's usually when I tend to lean in because I get really curious, and I
Yeah.
I'll
feel
bet
like
you have a great record collection.
I do. I actually have a music background, and I
Right.
actually we were talking about this before because I think you said your husband was in Worcester. I went to Oberlin Conservatory, and I was a composition major essentially. But I loved a lot of noise music. It's like a Japanese noise band called the Boredoms that were always kind of my favorite. But like if it's the weirder, the better. Like Dan Deacon, amazing. Just some really interesting people. But I always feel like when creating anything new, whether it's a product or whether it's a story, like you get people curious by essentially introducing things that just don't go together, right? It's
Right.
it's like we like sort of like that, the classic is the fish out of water, right kind of story. But like how could you make that fish really in some really weird water, right? Like what is it that you could do that could really make that feel right off and make people curious?
There was a great book from I read last year. I think the book is from, I'm looking, trying to find it now. It's called The Weird and the Eerie. And
Mm.
it's this exploration of in fiction, like what makes something weird. And and it takes all these classic sort of horror and odd movies and things, and even some, some Bergman things that are like familiar and very unfamiliar. But it talks about like what makes something weird in each story and how like the difference between something that scares you and something that unsettles you. And it was just this fascinating exploration of it's like two elements of the familiar that don't belong together, create the weird intrigue. And it was a fascinating book. If you're into the weird, read that one.
I'm definitely going to read. It's called The Weird and the Eerie.
Weird in the Ear by Mark Fisher, who was I got in. He was I think he was a hacker, an early computer person who got into cultural theory and things. Fascinating person. Like just reading about him was a dive that I, couldn't get out of for a while.
Fascinating. I'm going to pick that up today. That sounds awesome. There's the test that they did with kids that I always thought was horrifying, which was, if you are a parent and you want to freak out your kid, right, you'll wear a mask, right, essentially, right,
Right.
and right, you do something and the kids are like, oh, but then the minute you take off your mask and they see your face, it's like, oh, right, like it's like tension and release, right. But then the thing that I guess really breaks people is when there's a mask under the mask. So, right, you've taken
Oh
off, and then you
yeah,
take
I've
off the
heard
mask
this.
and
Yeah.
it's right, and it's something else. Apparently, that just really freaks people out. But like, I always like that's a really interesting story device. Like that, like there's something to build
Right.
right from that. So like that's kind of what I mean. Like there are just things out there that just seem like they're odd or they're weird or they make no sense, and you can usually use that as some sort of springboard or some sort of launching pad.
I love that
Have you
you.
seen the experiment where they take crying children and they throw a slice of American cheese at the kid's face and the
Yeah,
kid
they
stops crying
plop on their
instantly?
head. It's hilarious.
I'm like, there's something here. Like this is somewhere someone has to option this for a movie. And
You know what you could do? Because now, like, think about all the weird things that we hear from the CIA that were terrible, right? Like the MK Ultra, right? All the stuff is like these
yeah.
terrible CIA experiments. But what if you had a government that just did silly experiments? It's like the Dutch CIA, right? It's like, oh, we're
Right.
pretty serious, and we're trying to figure out like,
Oh my
oh,
God,
what's
we are
what's
going
the
to pitch
experiment?
this movie.
It's Cheesehead, right?
They're like a Western cult country, so they have to have some sort of intelligence infrastructure, but they're supported by NATO and everything, so they don't really do anything. So they're just
Yeah,
out there doing.
and they're just so dumb, right? Everything that they do is just
It's the
totally.
Polish. It's the Polish CIA. It would play
The
off
Polish
that joke.
CIA. I think if I could hear him though with like a Romanian accent, because Romanian accents are just always very, very funny to me for some reason.
Right, right.
But it's
All right,
like,
we've got an idea. We took a bunch
let's
of
do it.
dumb, put it together.
There we go. We've
We'll
In
got
get one
action.
serious British actor. We'll get like Gary Oldman to play a role, and it will legitimize
oh,
the whole thing. Like,
that's pretty fantastic, actually.
yeah, he'll come
Gary
in.
Oldman.
He'll be there from NATO to be like, what do we do? What are you guys doing with all the money we're giving you? It writes itself.
All
Yeah, who
right.
who would be like the worst pairing with Gary Oldman? Like who's like the opposite
Oh,
of
Pete Davidson. Pete Davidson from
Oh,
Saturday Night Live.
that's the movie. That's it. Right. You see the trailer already. Gary
He'd be
Oldman.
eating Taco Bell and like, what's up? That's the worst Pete Davidson ever. I love how Pete Davidson's whole character and culture is just like, I'm a stoner slacker and like you should buy this product because I endorse it. It's
Yeah, he's funny because I also see like he's somebody who's so damaged from the get-go. Like when you see him, you're like, oh, that's a damaged individual, right? And
right.
that's what makes him funny and tragic. But then we're actually seeing a Benjamin Buttons with him, where he's like slowly becoming,
Yeah.
less of like he's taking off the tattoos, and so
Yeah.
there's something interesting about his trajectory isn't like a descent into madness; it's a descent into normalcy.
Yeah.
And
Suburbia. Like
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, so he's the funny one.
Oh, wow. In action. So, you too, listener, if you want to try out some of these, you can go to David's website. And there's a section on the tools for better dumb thinking. So you can go in and there's all of the models that I think are in the book. Are they
Yeah,
all in
that's
the
right.
book? Okay.
Yeah, those are in the book, and then also you go to if you sign up for the newsletter. There's just like all sorts of stories. I've left the book, but the stories that are in the Demify newsletter, tend to be everything from talking about the game Exploding Kittens, which I think is Elon Lee is a fantastic creator, really
Yeah, that.
interesting. The way he
Love
thinks,
it.
I think, is fantastic. People like Richard Feynman, who's like I've just always loved Richard Feynman, the way he thinks, right, as a physicist, as a scientist, really wacky,
What's
right,
the name of
right.
that book? Like God Bless You, Mr. Feynman, or like
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. And the
yeah.
the stuff that's just so bizarre about him is really that his friends, like whenever you see that guy or whenever his friends would talk to him, you never really got the sense that he was like this very high Q individual. He always sort of comes across as kind of goofy, right? And
Yeah.
just kind of this weird guy. And
Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman is the name of the book.
that's it. Yeah. He's a fascinating one.
Yeah.
But the newsletter is really, sort of exploring, right, sort of what it means, right, to use Demify, and then showing more or less stories that are maybe a little more relevant to culture, right? Where I'm not trying to sort of, sell the idea or trying to get you to understand how to use it necessarily the way that the book does, but just certainly ways to sort of get you to think fresh every week, like just something that just feels like there's a new experiment to try that's just kind of fun.
All right. So you can sign up for David's newsletter, Dumbify, at david-carson.com. The link will be in the show notes. You can look for the podcast, same name, in the next month or two, and also the book, same name, Dumbify, in this summer. Anything else I missed before we go? Anything you want to say or plug or
No, but thank you
no?
guys. This is always a fun. I'm so happy that we were able to chat. So this
Yeah.
one's been on my
Absolutely.
list, and this was fun.
All right. Thanks so much for coming. And if you want
Thank
to
you.
check out David's world, david-carson.com again. All right. Thanks so much. Bye for now.
Bye bye.